For decades, various Western think tanks and leaders have been warning that Russia has designs on invading and seizing the Baltic states of Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia. This exact threat was the primary motive behind the three states joining NATO in March 2004. Russia's subsequent invasion of Ukraine, combined with the three states' unwavering support for Ukraine throughout the conflict, has only sharpened those fears. As a result, all three nations, in conjunction with fellow NATO members, have taken several steps to prevent or disrupt any such invasion. But not content with the extent of that protection, Lithuania went a step further and announced plans for the most concrete and comprehensive defensive measures yet, a 30-mile defensive belt all along its borders with Russia and Russia's ally, Belarus. Let's take a closer look at their defensive plans and why they're important. The reason for the Baltic states' high alert about a possible Russian invasion is, of course, the fact that other than Finland, they're the only NATO members that share a border with Russia. Estonia's border is roughly 200 miles long, although some 2/5 of that is demarcated by lakes, not land. Latvia shares an approximately 183-mile border with Russia and a further 106-mile border with Belarus. Lithuania, for its part, shares a 422-mile border with Belarus and a roughly 170-mile-long border with the Russian exclave of Kaliningrad, which is wedged between it and Poland to its south. Importantly, the Lithuanian capital of Vilnius is only 21 miles down the E28 highway from the Belarus border. That positions it as prime low-hanging fruit in the event of a Russian invasion. But in the Lithuanian plan unveiled by Defense Minister Dovilė Sakalienė in August 2025, the capital will be behind a deep 30-mile belt of layered defenses. In some circles, the plan to build such a defensive line was criticized as a 21st century version of the doomed Maginot Line, but the comparison is not really accurate. The Maginot Line was a network of concrete fortifications, obstacles, and weapon installations built by France between 1929 and 38 along its border with Germany to deter invasion by the Nazis. It stretched from Switzerland to Luxembourg, covering a distance of approximately 280 miles, and was designed to be impervious to most forms of attack, including aerial bombing and tank fire. The fortifications were built using thick concrete and massive amounts of steel with extensive underground passages, air-conditioned living quarters, recreation areas, supply storehouses, and an internal network of narrow-gauge railways to resupply the fortresses. French military planners believed the Maginot Line would deter German aggression by slowing an invasion force long enough for the French army to mobilize and counterattack, allowing for a more effective defense. The line was organized as a defense in depth, featuring forward listening posts that would sound the alarm and delay an enemy before falling back to the main fortifications. However, despite its advanced design and formidable defenses, the Maginot Line ultimately failed to prevent the German invasion of France in 1940. German forces simply bypassed it by invading through the Ardennes forest in Belgium, a region the French considered impassable for large military forces due to its dense terrain and lack of roads. This maneuver, known as Fall Gelb, which translates to Case Yellow, allowed the Germans to encircle the French and Allied armies, leading to the capture of over 500,000 prisoners and the eventual fall of France. Ultimately, the line's failure was not due to a lack of strength, but because it did not extend to the Belgian border, and French strategy had not anticipated a German attack through Belgium, which was not fortified. Lithuania did not plan on making the same mistake. The plans unveiled for the Lithuanian defense line cover the entire border, stretching from the Latvian border in the northeast all the way down to the Belarus-Poland border to the south, and right across the border with Kaliningrad. In fact, the only part of Lithuania's eastern and southern flanks not covered by this defensive line is the 65-mile-long border with Poland, the so-called Surovikin Gap. Building a massive, multi-layered defensive belt to block the primary road route linking Lithuania, and indeed the other Baltic states with NATO allies, would be counterproductive to say the least. With the Surovikin Gap already heavily defended by NATO forces, it means there won't be any gaps in the defensive lines for the Russians to exploit if they invade, unlike with the Maginot Line. Furthermore, the Ukraine war has proven the effectiveness of multi-layered defensive belts on the modern battlefield. Lithuania's defensive belt was conceived in no small part based on the Ukrainian successes in holding back Russian offensives using similar lines. Ukraine's defensive belts have been very successful in forcing the Russians to advance at a snail's pace and with high losses. However, these defenses have themselves been largely based on Russia's defensive belt in southeastern Ukraine in 2023, which Ukraine was ultimately unable to breach. The defensive line was dubbed the Surovikin Line after the notorious Russian general Sergei Surovikin, nicknamed General Armageddon, who had ordered and overseen its construction. He had commanded the southern grouping of Russian forces for the initial invasion into Ukraine and became the commander of all Russian forces in Ukraine from October 2022 until September 2023. Following the failed Wagner PMC coup attempt in June 2023, Surovikin was relieved of his duties and was rumored to be involved in Russian and/or Wagner operations in Africa. But his defensive lines undoubtedly changed the momentum of the war. Throughout late 2022 and early 2023, the Ukrainians had successfully pushed the Russians out of Kharkiv and key settlements in the Donbass, and had amassed a massive force in the southeast. Replete with advanced NATO weaponry like Abrams tanks and Bradley armored fighting vehicles, this force aimed to retake Russian-occupied territory in the Zaporizhia and Kherson regions and push all the way to Crimea. But it ran headfirst into a brick wall in the Surovikin line, causing the counteroffensive to fail with substantial losses in manpower and equipment. Besides Ukraine's foray into Russia's Kursk region, also eventually repelled after 8 months, the front line began moving steadily westwards. The Surovikin line, which still stands today, spans approximately 81 miles, extending from Vasilivka in Zaporizhia Oblast to Volnovakha in Donetsk Oblast. It consists of 3 layers of various obstacles and fighting positions, fronted by sprawling minefields which the Ukrainians had to try and navigate before even reaching the first line. The first actual layer is an anti-vehicle ditch that's designed to prevent tanks, infantry fighting vehicles and other heavy armor from advancing. The second layer is a row of dragon's teeth, concrete spikes also intended to stop vehicles. The third layer consists of trenches manned by Russian soldiers who can observe the ditches and dragon's teeth from their fighting positions. In between each layer are additional minefields, and wherever possible, the third layer fighting positions are built in elevated positions to enhance battlefield awareness and improve the effectiveness of counteroffensive measures like artillery strikes. The strategy worked, with Ukrainian forces only being able to temporarily puncture holes through the minefields and into the first line of defense in a handful of villages before ultimately being forced back. The Surovikin line had succeeded where the Maginot line had failed. In the aftermath of the failed Zaporizhia counteroffensive, Ukraine moved into a strategy it called active defense, enhancing its already substantial defensive fortifications with a kind of Surovikin line of its own. By early 2024, row upon row of freshly dug trenches, concrete dragon's teeth, and underground command centers sprang up along key segments of the more than 621 miles of front line. In particular, defensive preparations were boosted around the Donetsk towns of Liman and Avdiivka, as well as in front of Kupiansk, in the neighboring Kharkiv region. The construction of fortifications, based on the same 3-layered system of trenches, tank traps, and strongpoints preceded by minefields, was also ordered along the borders with Russia and Belarus, all the way to the Polish border. Deeper into Ukrainian-held territory, a maze of fallback positions was also built, consisting of trench networks and new dug-in command centers. The city of Pokrovsk, for example, which Russia has been unsuccessfully trying to capture for most of 2025, is defended by a 2-layered trench system running all around the city. In front of and around key cities like Pokrovsk and Liman, Ukraine has placed a series of fortifications less than a mile apart. As Clement Molan, co-founder of the French Atum Mundi organization, put it, "Each fort can defend itself from every direction. You have to take all of them to advance." Russia eventually, and at very high cost, managed to take Avdiivka and the similarly fortified Bakhmut and Toretsk. However, in other areas of the front, the Ukrainian lines provided unbreakable resistance. In the Sumy region, for example, Russia's attempts to create a buffer zone along its border to prevent daily Ukrainian drone attacks and the possibility of another incursion like the one into Kursk stalled at the first line of Ukrainian defensive fortifications. All of the lessons learned from both the Russian and Ukrainian Surovikin lines have clearly been absorbed into Lithuania's plans for a defensive belt of its own. Indeed, similar strategies are also being put into place in Estonia, Latvia, and Poland. In January 2024, the 3 Baltic states agreed on a set of wide-ranging defense arrangements, including the so-called Baltic Defense Line, comprising hundreds of bunkers and other defensive measures. The line is being built all along their collective 1,000 miles of border with Russia and Belarus. They aim to funnel the invading Russian forces into an advantageous position for defenders. For its part, Estonia plans to build 600 bunkers for $65 million right across its borders with Russia. The defense will consist of bunkers, support points, and distribution lines in peacetime, Hanno Pevkur, Estonia's defense minister, said. But in the event of hostilities, local reserves will be ready to deploy mines, anti-tank ditches, barbed wire, and dragon's teeth. A diagram of prototype bunkers published by Estonia's defense ministry shows how the oblong structures are designed to fit into a T-shaped dugout, with their entrances protected by earthworks. Latvia began constructing its section of the Baltic Defense Line in May 2024, deploying anti-mobility obstacles like dragon's teeth, concrete blocks nicknamed Lego blocks, and metal hedges. These obstacles are stored in depots near the border, from where they're being strategically placed by the National Armed Forces. As of August 2024, the first phase of the line in Latvia's eastern region, Latgala, was underway, with pyramidal concrete obstacles being transported and deployed. Meanwhile, in May 2024, Poland announced a similar major upgrade to its defenses along its border with Belarus and Kaliningrad, dubbed Shield East. The plan aims to strengthen anti-drone surveillance and on-ground military defenses through a system of fortifications and barriers all along the roughly 430-mile border. Due for completion by 2028, the network of fortifications is anticipated to cost around $2.5 billion, with a goal to protect the territory of Poland and hamper the mobility of our adversaries' troops while making such mobility easier for our own troops and to protect civilians, according to Defense Minister Władysław Kozyniak-Kamysz. Now, Lithuania has given us the most concrete details about its plans for its defensive line to date. In the summer of 2024, Lithuania began setting up 27 engineering equipment parks with stores of counter-mobility tools such as razor wire, concrete roadblocks, dragon's teeth, and anti-tank barriers nicknamed hedgehogs, which are caltrop-like assemblies of crossed metal beams. Like the Surovikin line, these stores will be used to construct a dense, 3-layered, 30-mile ring of fortifications, whose primary aim is to slow down any Russian invasion and force them into areas where it's easier to resist. The first echelon, roughly 3 miles in depth, will start with an anti-tank ditch next to the border fence, followed by an embankment, strips of dragon teeth and minefields, and then 2 layers of strongpoints for defending infantry. Sakhalin has previously indicated that this first layer is likely to include anti-personnel mines. Lithuania and several other NATO members on the eastern flank recently withdrew from the Ottawa Convention, which prohibits the weapons. However, Lithuania has also placed an $11.7 million order for anti-tank mines, on top of previous deals to buy 85,000 of the mines for a total of $58.3 million. Further back, in the second and third echelons, bridges will be prepared for demolition, and there will be further lines of infantry positions. There's also a plan to fell trees along the roads leading to towns and cities, presumably to make it easier to obstruct and destroy any invading Russian armor. The second echelon starts around 12 miles from the border, and the third around 30 miles from the border. To further bolster the defenses of all 3 echelons, Lithuania has also replenished its stock of 155mm artillery shells, ordered 44 state-of-the-art Leopard 2A8 battle tanks from Germany, and taken delivery of $7 million worth of Israeli-made Spike LR2 anti-tank missiles. Lithuania is already one of the few NATO members to be spending 5% of its GDP on defense, which was agreed between the members in 2025 and is expected to take effect in 2035. It's currently already spending around 5.5% of GDP on modernizing and upgrading its military, including the construction of this new defensive line. However, much like Ukraine, Lithuania's biggest problem may be mustering up the manpower to adequately operate these formidable defenses. Lithuania can field about 23,000 professional soldiers and a further 104,000 reservists. Estonia and Latvia's armed forces are even smaller in size. Estonia has around 7,500 active personnel and 41,000 reserves, while Latvia has 8,500 active personnel and 16,000 reserves. Just across the border, Belarus has a force of around 65,000 with 350,000 in reserve, plus Russian troops numbering anywhere between 2 and 10,000. It's not clear how many Russian troops remain in Kaliningrad. Before Russia invaded Ukraine, an estimated 25,000 troops were based there. But as a result of redeployments during the war, that number is believed to have dropped to as low as 6,000. However, Russia is believed to have dozens of tactical nuclear weapons stationed in both Kaliningrad and Belarus. Plus, in August 2025, Russian President Vladimir Putin announced that Russia's Oreshnik hypersonic missiles had also been deployed to Belarus. So without a major boost of forces from NATO partners, Russia and its ally Belarus have a substantial manpower and high-end weaponry advantage over the Baltic states. That's another reason why the implementation of the Baltic defense line makes so much sense. War games indicate that in the event of a Russian invasion of the Baltic states, the outcome of the battle may hinge on how quickly NATO can get reinforcements into the affected areas. NATO would likely have to immobilize Russia's air, sea and land area access and denial systems in Kaliningrad and on the Belarusian side of the border and secure safe passage for reinforcements through the Suwalki Gap. That will take time, with every extra day increasing the likelihood of a successful Russian invasion. The Baltic defense line will disrupt and hamper Russia's ability to penetrate the Baltic states' defenses, buying precious time for reinforcements to arrive. But it's also designed to shepherd invading forces into disadvantageous positions, from where it'll be easier for NATO forces to trap them and finish them off. In this sense, these defensive systems are also, to an extent, derived from the Russians. They mirror the Soviet tactic of the elastic defense, first used in the Battle of Kursk during World War II in 1943, but also increasingly used in Russia's 2024-25 offensive in Donetsk. The idea is to allow opposing forces to seemingly break through your defensive lines in selected areas. However, the breakthrough areas are actually disadvantageous areas. Once the enemy is inside, the flanks are closed, trapping the enemy forces inside, where they are destroyed. The borders between the Baltic states and Belarus and Russia are characterized by a mix of flat, forested and wetland terrain, with significant obstacles like rivers, lakes and marshes. In many ways, that makes it ideal territory from which to mount an elastic defense around a multi-layered ring of defenses. The areas to defend heavily and the areas into which NATO would try and force the Russians more or less define themselves. But Lithuania is still going to need enough manpower to run these defenses effectively. In this regard, the announcement in May that Germany would be deploying a full brigade permanently to Lithuania is bound to be a huge boost. A contingent of US troops is already stationed in the country, as is an advanced contingent of 500 Germans. But by 2027, the intention is to have a full brigade of some 5,000 highly trained and experienced German troops of the 45th Armored Brigade permanently deployed there. Lithuania is also ramping up the preparation of its own forces. Between August 11th and 22nd, it conducted tactical exercises along the Belarusian border called Fierce Wolf 2025. The training, involving at least 350 troops and 50 units of equipment, included live fire drills and defensive operations in populated areas using Vilkas infantry fighting vehicles and other battalion combat equipment. In the background, construction of the defensive line is already well underway. The Lithuanian Ministry of Defense said the timeline for the border defense project is 10 years, with 2 distinct phases. Ahead of 2028, the focus is on developing and building measures that would stop a Russian advance. Then, the ministry explained, from 2029 onwards begins the long-term maintenance, system modernization and development phase. Multiple NATO political and military leaders have suggested 2029 or 2030 as likely dates for a Russian invasion. If that's accurate, Lithuania's first line of defense and its second and its third will be ready. Hopefully, Russia's attempted invasion will meet the same fate as the Ukrainian counteroffensive against the Surovikin line. We'll keep you updated as the situation develops, so make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss out on the inside story. Thank you, as always, for watching.